So one of the postmodernist claims, this is really important to understand because they got something right. They got the same thing right that artificial intelligence researchers ran into in the 1960s when they were trying to make robots. So what they first assumed was that there's the world, man. It's just sitting there. All you have to do is look at the thing and you see it. Yeah. It's simple. What's hard is to figure out how to maneuver in the world. So they started building robots that they tried to start building robots that could see and act in the world. And then they found out that seeing was way harder than anybody had ever possibly imagined. That you probably even need a body to see. Which Rodney Brooks figured that out, who was an MIT roboticist. He invented the Roomba, by the way.
Yeah, so meaning that just putting a set of optic whatever in the robot, that in and of itself is not enough to see in the authentic way.
Not at all. Well, because partly what you're doing really when you're seeing is mapping the world onto your action. In fact, there are connections from your eyes that go directly to your motor cortex. They bypass your conscious vision. So for example, when you look at that cup, your eyes make your hands prepare to do this. Because you say, well, that's an empirical object. It's a cup. But that isn't what your brain thinks. Your brain thinks, no, that's a thing to drink from. Right? So that's its fundamental. See, here's another example of that that's kind of strange. Why are a beanbag and a stump both chairs? They share no objective features in common, except size. Yeah. Well, the answer is because you can sit on them. And so a lot of our categories are of that sort. They're not empirical categories. They're functional categories. And so when you look at the world, if you don't have a body, you can't segregate it into functional categories. Okay, so that was called the frame problem. Too many things to look at. How do you choose? No one knows. The answer to that is you evolve in a Darwinian sense over its billions of years in a trial and error fashion, figuring out how to map this exceptionally complex reality onto a body that can survive and propagate. That's truly the answer.
So that basically evolution led us to the point where, with no thinking involved in any way, I can out of the corner of my mind see this, know what it is, know that there's some liquid in there, that I'm going to drink it, I will feel satiated. And that really is just the Darwinian evolution.
Well, so there's a famous experiment called the visual cliff. So you do it with babies. And so you take a surface here and a surface here, about, say, this high, and you put a pane of glass over the hole in the middle. And then you see if you can get the baby to crawl across the visual cliff. Well, they won't do it because they don't see the floor and a piece of glass. They see a falling off place. So, and they directly see the falling off place. They don't see the hole and think, I'm going to fall, therefore I shouldn't. They see it as a falling off place. Their body sees it, and then it produces an emotion. Eyes map right onto the emotion and stop the child. And we do that with snakes too, and with fire, and various, and with sexual stimuli. You know, you don't need thought. The eyes map, they map right onto your body.
Note, I'm going to give you some more water right now because I can sense that perhaps you're thirsty, and I know that I was closer to this, and you were closer to your cup.
Yeah, well, we take all that for granted. So the AI people came up against this problem. It's almost impossible to see the world because it's too complex. Well, the postmodernists, to the degree that they have something credible to say, came across the same problem in textual analysis. They thought, well, there's an endless number of ways to interpret a Shakespearean play. And that's true. There's an near infinite number of ways you could interpret it. So then they said, well, there's no canonical interpretation. There's no correct interpretation. So then, in some sense, what are we doing? Well, then the answer came, which is the wrong answer. Well, we're basically playing power games to establish ourselves in the world. And all of our interpretations are only in service of that. Okay, so why is that wrong? Well, first of all, we aren't only playing power games. So that's where the Marxism creeps in, because Marx thought economics drove everything. And the postmodernist power is just sleight of hand economics. Okay, so that isn't all that drives us.
It's basically the same thing.
It's the same thing. Yeah. New language, same thing. Allowed them to play the same game after the economics game became too self-evidently corrupt. So they said, well, we're just playing this power game. But the thing is, that's not right. And it's also, the interpretations aren't arbitrary. So you say, well, there's an infinite number of ways to interpret this room. Yes, but there's a finite number of ways that will enable you to make your desires manifest in this room. A very finite number of ways. And those desires are constrained biologically to begin with. So you're a limited perceiver. You come in here with the capacity to turn the world into a functional entity built into you. So, and then there's another, so that's a big constraint, man. So if you're analyzing Macbeth, you might say, well, what could you say about Macbeth? You could never stop talking about Macbeth. What do you want to do as a reader? You want to extract out something from it that enables you to behave in a way that gives you a better grip on the world. So you're more skillful in dealing with the world. But more than that, you have to be more skillful in a way that other people also allow, or even better, support and admire. So you're constrained by the world. Like, if I want that water, I have to go like this.
Right.
So I can't wish it here. I can't use the other side of my hand. This is it. This is the interpretation that would bring me water.
Right.
Now, I can't grab your water and swill it down either, because, I mean, I could, but that would be rude.
Right.
Right. So you know, norms around food sharing, for example, are very precise.
Right. We could also dive into an interesting discussion about free will here, but we'll put that aside.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we can talk about that too. So I have to come out with an interpretation of the world that functions for me. It has to function for me in a way that doesn't interfere with my function tomorrow or next week or next year. So that's a tough one, man.
Yeah.
And then it has to function so that other people will cooperate and compete with me in a peaceful way around those interpretations, or otherwise it's not going to be good for me. So there is a very large number of potential interpretations, but what the postmodernists won't grapple with is that that doesn't mean the sphere of coherent interpretations is infinite. It isn't. It's because we're embodied, because we're social, because there's a world around us. Those limit what we can do.
So really, in a certain way, they're trying to destroy the very structure that has enabled us to function in society, right? I mean, would that be the end argument here? That what what they're doing is, I mean, they're taking a hatchet basically to the root of the tree that humanity has built, because they're trying to basically destroy the underpinnings of all of it.
Well, they're actually doing that consciously, to some degree. Like, it's there in Derrida. Now, you might say,